Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. My office had a fatal accident during the building process. A crane broke and slammed into the side of the building, killing one Indian man and one Thai man. Since my office operates with shift work, some of my colleagues saw the Indian man, but never the Thai man. During one night shift, my colleague Daniel was smoking at the corner, away from the security camera, enjoying the view of the Western Sea. From the corner of his eye, he saw a figure. He turned and saw an Indian man looking at him. The man was drenched and appeared sad. Daniel was shocked, because he knew there weren't any Indian men working the night shift that day. He was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or run, because the figure was standing at the only exit. After a while, the Indian man seemed to be talking to him, but there was no sound at all. After his silent speech, the figure turned and disappeared. Another colleague, Mark, was having his late supper at 3 a.m. in the pantry. He, too, saw the Indian man standing at a distance, looking sad as though he was trying to communicate. After a while, the figure vanished. As these incidents became the talk of the office, most people refused to work night shifts. Consequently, the management scrapped night shifts entirely. The latest craze in my office involves spirits apparently taking the form of normal humans, appearing to my colleagues as one of their own. Alice went to the ladies' room and saw Brenda combing her hair. They struck up a conversation, then Brenda entered a cubicle. Alice left the toilet and returned to her workspace. Suddenly, she saw Brenda at her workstation. Confused, Alice asked how she managed to get back so quickly. Brenda replied that she hadn't left for the toilet all morning. Another colleague, Charlie, saw Alice from a distance and tried calling out to her. Alice walked quickly and turned a corner. When Charlie reached Alice's workstation, it was empty. After asking around, he discovered that Alice hadn't come to work that day and had applied for emergency leave. What exactly is happening in this office? These unexplained incidents leave everyone in a frenzy, with a blend of fear and intrigue hanging in the air. Are these the ghosts of those who perished in the building accident? Or is it something else entirely? A few years ago, I had an experience that still haunts me to this day. Our office was situated in a building known for its eerie occurrences. Many colleagues had shared stories of seeing apparitions and hearing strange noises, but I had always been a skeptic. One evening, I was working late, trying to meet a tight deadline. The office was completely empty, and the only light came from my desk lamp. Around 9 p.m., I felt a sudden drop in temperature. I brushed it off as a draft and continued working. But then I heard faint whispers coming from the corridor. I paused and listened carefully, but the whispers stopped. I went back to work, only for the whispers to start again. This time, they were louder and more distinct, like a conversation between two people, though I couldn't make out the words. Curious and slightly unnerved, I got up and walked toward the corridor. The whispers grew louder as I approached. The dimly lit corridor revealed a shadow moving at the far end. My heart raced, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination. When I reached the end of the corridor, the whispers abruptly stopped. I searched the area, but found no one. Feeling uneasy, I decided to call it a night and head home. As I gathered my things, I heard a soft humming sound coming from the opposite direction. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the sound. To my shock, I saw a woman dressed in an old-fashioned outfit standing near the window, humming an unfamiliar tune. She seemed oblivious to my presence. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. As I took a step closer, she suddenly turned to face me. Her eyes were hollow, and her face was pale and expressionless. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized I was face to face with a ghost. Before I could react, she vanished into thin air. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, unable to comprehend what had just happened. That night, I left the office in a hurry, unable to sleep for days. The experience made me a believer in the supernatural, and I never stayed late at the office again. What was it that I encountered that night? I may never know, but the memory of those whispers and the ghostly figure still haunts me to this day. Last year, I was working as a secretary in the eastern area of Singapore. It was a demanding job, but I had always been dedicated and aimed to complete my tasks meticulously. The office had a certain charm with its modern design and large glass windows that offered a panoramic view of the bustling city. By day, it was filled with the hum of conversations and ringing phones. But by night, it transformed into an eerie, silent place. One particular night, I found myself working late. The other staff members had all gone home, their desks now empty and quiet. The overhead fluorescent lights cast a stark glow over the office, creating long shadows on the walls. I had a pile of paperwork that needed to be completed before the next morning. So I remained focused at the front desk. It was around 8 p.m., and the ticking of the clock seemed louder than usual, marking every passing second in the stillness of the office. As I immersed myself in the documents, I suddenly felt a chill seeping in from underneath the table. It started as a gentle cold, but it quickly grew more intense. The odd thing was that the office itself was quite warm, almost stifling. The air conditioning had been turned off for the night, and I was wearing a skirt that evening, so my legs felt the brunt of the cold, making me shiver involuntarily. The sensation was so out of place that it pulled me out of my concentration. Curious and slightly apprehensive, I glanced down to see what could possibly be causing the chill. To my utter shock, I saw a small, bald, naked child resembling a 5-year-old, grinning up at me from beneath the desk. His eyes were wide and eerie, and his grin sent shivers down my spine. For a moment, I was frozen in place, my mind struggling to process the surreal and terrifying image before me. On pure instinct, and perhaps the adrenaline of the moment, I did something I would have never imagined doing. I kicked the strange child. My foot made contact, but the texture felt all wrong. It was almost like kicking through a dense fog or mist. The next thing I knew, I was bolting out of the office, still in my high heels, my heart pounding in my chest. I left the lights on, the door unlocked, and all my belongings behind in my frantic escape. As I stumbled into the hallway, I nearly collided with the security guard making his rounds. I must have looked a sight, breathless, pale, and shaking. Between gasps, I managed to explain what I had seen, though my words were jumbled and frantic. The guard, trying to calm me, assured me that he would check the office. He led me back to the front of the office, his baton ready in hand. While I stood nervously at the entrance, dialing my boyfriend's number with trembling fingers, the security guard entered the office cautiously, searching every nook and cranny. His footsteps echoed in the empty space. I waited anxiously, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the rings as I prayed for someone to answer. Minutes felt like hours, and my mind raced with 1,000 questions and fears. What if the child, or whatever it was, showed up again? What if it was some kind of spirit or ghost? The very thought made my skin crawl. Finally, the guard re-emerged, shaking his head. He found nothing, no sign of the child, no indication that anyone or anything had been there. He tried to reassure me, suggesting that maybe I was just tired and my mind had played tricks on me, but I knew what I had seen. There was no mistaking the unnatural chill or the malevolent grin of that child. The experience had shaken me to the core. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind replayed the incident over and over. Sleep eluded me. Each creak of my apartment added to my anxiety. I couldn't fathom returning to that office, not after what I had witnessed. The next day, with my decision made, I handed in my resignation without notice. My boss was baffled, but I couldn't bring myself to explain the real reason. What was it I saw that night? Was it really a 5-year-old kid? This happened during the last 2 years in my previous office building in TG Bagger area. The building, about 10 years old, was where I worked for the second time during those 2 years. My office moved out a month ago, which is why I feel comfortable sharing this now. Nothing unusual happened during my first stint in the building 10 years ago. However, before I started working there the second time, my ex-colleagues who remained behind told me eerie stories. The strange occurrences began after I left my previous company. Colleagues who worked late would sometimes find the office extremely cold, even though the centralized air conditioning turned off at 6 p.m. They also claimed the photocopier would occasionally print blank pages on its own, despite no incoming faxes or anyone near it. Those were their stories, but here are mine. My job often required me to work irregular hours, so I would sometimes return to the office in the middle of the night. Let me describe the layout. The office was divided into two areas, the reception area and the rest of the office, separated by an 8-foot-high wall that didn't reach the ceiling, allowing sound to travel. The main door consisted of 2 glass doors with a number lock. After 6 p.m., when the receptionist left, the front office was typically empty. The receptionist's counter was covered with glass, the office had raised flooring, and it was on the top level with 3 units. Our unit was in the center, and the other 2 were unoccupied during the last 2 years. Access to our level required a lift card, and the fire access staircase was locked from the outside. If the door was opened and closed, it would auto-lock, trapping you outside. Whenever we worked late, we often heard sounds coming from the receptionist's counter, stationery being moved, the stapler clicking, a PC mouse being used, typing on the keyboard, or even the chair being shifted. These noises were unnerving, but didn't bother us much when it was still early. One night, I returned to the office around midnight to work. The office was unusually cold, even though the air conditioning was off, and it wasn't raining. I needed to use the toilet after supper, and as I passed the corridor on my way, I heard someone entering the office. The number lock beeped, followed by a loud bang of the glass door, hitting the magnetic strip. Usually, only one other colleague or I would return at such an hour, and we always closed the door gently to avoid damaging the glass. I ignored it and continued to the toilet. While in a cubicle, I suddenly heard the rubbish bin cover spinning loudly. There were only 2 cubicles, and I hadn't heard anyone enter the toilet. I called out, thinking it might be the security guard patrolling, but there was no response. Then, the toilet light started flickering. Quickly finishing up, I left and returned to the office. To my surprise, the lights were off, even though I had left them on. It wasn't a power trip, I had to turn them back on manually, and my PC was still running. Though shaken, I continued working before leaving soon after. The next day, I asked my colleague if he had returned that night. As expected, he said no, he was the type who would avoid late nights unless absolutely necessary. On another occasion, a female colleague finished work around 7 p.m. After turning off the lights, she went to the toilet. As she passed the corridor, she heard the number lock beep and the glass door bang. She turned back, hoping to catch whoever it was. To her horror, no one was there. It would have been impossible for anyone to vanish in seconds without her hearing the lift door open. She called me, thinking I had returned, but I hadn't. She left immediately and didn't dare to go back. The next day, we asked around, but no one admitted to returning. Another encounter occurred around 10 p.m. when I was alone in the office. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Given the uneven raised flooring, footsteps were unmistakable, but no one was there. The most chilling experience happened weeks before our move. I was working late, around 11 p.m., when I saw a transparent figure moving through the office. It looked like an old man with spectacles and a bald head, resembling my ex-boss, who was very much alive. Though scared, I shouted at the figure not to disturb me, and it vanished. On the night before our official move, I was packing up my belongings. After finishing, I went to the toilet to wash up and then headed to the lift. As I turned toward the office door, I saw the same transparent old man standing there, waving goodbye with a disappointed expression. It felt as though he knew it was my last night there. I waved back. Thankfully, the lift arrived quickly, and I left. Those are my experiences in that building. Till my next encounter, farewell. This incident happened during my maternity leave, and my colleagues shared it with me on my first day back at work. Our office building is somewhere in Raffles Place, though I can't reveal the exact location. The incident involved a Chinese maintenance worker named Ah Tan, whom we all knew well. He was working a night shift with a Malay colleague. As part of their routine, Ah Tan would go floor by floor to check for broken lights. During his rounds, he noticed a light on the 6th floor that needed repair. At around 7 p.m., Ah Tan reached the staircase leading to the 6th floor. There, he saw a woman squatting with her back against the wall, making it impossible to see her face. The dimly lit corridor and the surrounding silence created an eerie atmosphere. Ignoring his unease, Ah Tan approached the woman and asked what she was doing there. Without turning, she responded in a cold, disembodied voice that sent chills down his spine. She claimed her son had been playing hide and seek in the wall and refused to come out. She explained, in a monotonous tone, that she had brought him to visit her office. The absurdity of her words baffled Ah Tan, but he brushed it off, thinking she might be delusional or playing a prank. After her explanation, the woman slowly stood up but still didn't turn to face him. She demanded a cigarette. Her voice, though emotionless, carried an unsettling undertone. Wanting to help, Ah Tan handed her a cigarette, his hands trembling. She then asked him to light it for her. As the flame flickered to life and touched the cigarette, the atmosphere shifted. The woman began to turn around, her movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. The dim corridor light cast disturbing shadows on her form. Ah Tan's heart pounded as her face came into view. What he saw was far from human. Her eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to devour the surrounding light. Her mouth was unnaturally wide, stretched into a grotesque smile, exposing rows of jagged, blackened teeth. The skin on her face was pallid, decayed, as if she had been dead for a long time. Before Ah Tan could process the terror before him, the woman let out a shrieking laughter. The sound was an unnerving cacophony, filled with malice and despair. It echoed through the empty floor, piercing his ears like shards of glass. Even after the sound faded, the haunting laughter reverberated in his mind. The shock and horror were too much for Ah Tan to bear. His vision blurred, and his legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed to the floor in a heap, still clutching the lighter. The laughter seemed to linger in the air even as the woman vanished. Ah Tan was later found barely conscious and was immediately taken to the hospital. The ordeal left him with a severe fever and a look of pure terror etched onto his face. He could barely speak, and when he did, his words were incoherent, haunted by the memory of the grotesque face he had encountered. Ah Tan never fully recovered from the experience. The trauma had taken a toll on his mental health. He resigned from his job soon after, unable to return to the building that held such horrific memories. What exactly did Ah Tan see that night on the 6th floor? No one knows for certain. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.